Hello, everyone, and welcome to Trek Prime, Episode 22. And this is a subject that I've been kind of bandying about for a little while in different ways. And I don't even know what you'd call it, but basically it's about Deep Space Nine, which was, if we count the animated series, would you say that would be the third or fourth spin-off? I'm not sure how you
I think,
calculate that.
yeah, probably the fourth, yeah.
Okay. Third live-action spin-off. Fourth technical spin-off, but yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, and I'm not talking about Deep Space Nine because that could be as a whole, that'd be a very long conversation. But just a small aspect of the theme of the show, and this was a very different kind of Star Trek. It wasn't really even a Trek per se. It was a way station on the very edge of the Federation, where they didn't have a starship at first, and they were on the edge where there was this wormhole to another quadrant of the galaxy, and the strange new worlds and civilizations came to them. It almost went directly against Star Trek's concept in a lot of ways, which goes some criticism about it. But there's another trope I had about Deep Space Nine, just the 7 years of it, looking onward. I mean, if I went back and watched it again, I'd probably notice a lot more. Then a couple of friends of mine, or people that I've known, I should say, have mentioned that a lot of Deep Space Nine, and I've noticed this, has a lot of similarities in its construction and its character, interactions that mimics Golden Age Hollywood during the era of the Motion Picture Code, the Hays Code. Just for any of you who don't know what that is, during the 1930s, Postmaster General Will Hays and later a group of Catholic bishops got together and decided that there should be a motion picture code after the end of the silent era, when movies started to be able to talk, where instead of the government interfering in movies, that the movie industry would self-censor. And there's a huge list of them. I suppose if you go to the Hays Code, it'll show you a list of what you couldn't do on films in those days, from the 1930s to the 60s. And it was pretty much nothing. I mean, it was pretty much nothing. And it pretty much created old Hollywood, where you had to kind of write between the lines. And that occurred with Deep Space Nine. Now, this is my idea, and I have one particular thing I noticed in this. But I wanted to have Jeff, do if he noticed anything particular that might have mimicked anything in the old Hollywood era he might remember in that series.
As a whole, I mean, I was completely oblivious to it. I mean, watching.
You didn't notice any? Huh.
No, I mean, until they started blatantly throwing it out. When they started bringing in, the lounge singer and.
Vic Fontaine, yeah, James Darren. Yeah, that was one I was going to mention, but
I mean, only until then. I mean, when the Dominion War started up, and then they started kind of bringing, like 1950s or 1940s kind of feel to the
the Vegas lounge singer.
And then it became apparent. I mean, I think a lot of people at that point kind of picked up on, the era, a thing that they were kind of going with at that time.
But I had heard stories about the show kind of being loosely based around movies like Casablanca, which came out at the beginning of World War II, kind of this outpost on the edge of the world, basically, where there are traitors and rogues and people you can't necessarily trust, but they're trying to work together towards some common cause.
Yeah. And
so basically, I think, to me, that setup kind of emphasizes how Deep Space Nine, the setup had a very old Hollywood flavor, because they're not on a starship. Not everybody around them is polished brass Federation personnel.
Yeah.
There are Federation personnel, but they're interacting with aliens with their own agendas, and they're trying to make this station that's been ransacked into something. And so there's a premise there. But you're right, the Vic Fontaine thing, I think that was the most noticeable. And I don't know if you noticed it around that time too. They would start to, if they went into a battle with the Dominion, the crew members would start to kind of recite, or start to go into this poetry. And you'd often hear that in old fighter plane movies.
Yeah.
They'd make these battles into some poetic thing. Now, I know the Klingons have already had a monopoly on that, with turning battle into some poetic thing, but the Federation people would, if they went into battle, it was always like, well, we don't really want to do this, but we know we have to defend ourselves. But with this, it was all very glorious, and there was all this stuff about, it was all very magisterial, which reminded me of the old World War II era setups, where war was very glorified.
Yeah.
You know, so I kind of saw that in Deep Space Nine too as an element of a Hollywood trope just in that show. And you know, I mean, you know, be honest with you, I haven't seen every Hollywood classic from the 1940s and 30s, but you know, I do know elements of it. For example, if you notice, I don't know if you notice this too, the Star Trek characters in the show take a long time in Deep Space Nine to really develop their relationships. They don't form right off.
Right.
And if you watch a lot of pre-code movies, sometimes the relationships between characters never happen at all. It's because of that code.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. Is this subject terribly limited and one-sided on my end? I picked it, but I don't know. I mean, I just want to make sure you can chime in with something here, you know?
Well, no, I mean, I follow you up to this point. I mean, it's like I said, they did reflect a lot of World War II in there, especially towards the end. And to me, because it was so blatant, it was like, you know, stop slapping me in the face with this. You know, I mean, I wanted to see more of how future humans would deal with war, not mirroring how humans dealt with it before. That, you know, I wanted to see a little more evolved look to how it's handled, you know.
I guess if we want to talk about Hollywood, okay, now, I think we're both familiar with the Hollywood of the 1990s. I believe the term for it was actually the New Hollywood.
Yeah.
And we're talking about, you know, the end of the generation that created the Star Wars, the E.T., the indie filmmakers, the George Lucases, the Steven Spielbergs coming out and making these indie films that got successful. We're talking about all of a sudden the rebirth of the mega, you know, billion-dollar movie box office.
Yeah.
Where everything had to break records to be successful, where the indie movie as a success sort of died out. Do you think that the return of that big brassy Hollywood, except not musicals or anything like that, or not big epics, but kind of the big budget action film, which we've seen in another aspect of Star Trek more recently. I wanted to mention that. Do you think that ethic kind of affected Deep Space Nine during that time in a way too, that it came so close on to the birth of the new Hollywood?
Yeah, you could see it was, you know, not just with Deep Space Nine, but with other shows, movies and stuff like that. You know, things were changing into this more, what I would call the dumbing down of an era, you know, because it seemed to me like, you know, everything about Hollywood at that time was getting more to this less story, more action kind of.
Right.
You
try
know,
to sell it more.
Yeah. And to me, it was like, you know, during the 80s, we had programs that had, you know, a little more story and not a lot of action. And it was like big, you know, it was like, let's just say like these shows that these one night a week shows used to come on, like Falcon Crest and, you know, Dynasty and Dallas. I mean, people were more interested in these shows that had story to it and not so much action. And then it kind of flipped, you know, when we got into the 90s, where we're doing exactly the opposite now. And it's like, you know, I just didn't like it that way, you know.
I think Deep Space Nine, I think now, like I said, I don't really want to talk about specifics about, because there are some things about Deep Space Nine that I actually enjoy. And I want to mention this right away. Deep Space Nine did end up having some of the most interesting characters in Star Trek.
Yeah.
Because they were very multi-layered. But I'm going to say this right off the bat. I felt they shortchanged a lot of them too. But that we'll get into that a little bit later. But
yeah.
I just wanted to start out by saying that one of the issues I had with Deep Space Nine from the middle is that they advertised the show as the darker, grittier Star Trek. Do you remember that phrase they used?
Yeah.
Very big in the beginning. And it's not, is it me? Is it just me? Or did it seem like they went way further than they maybe needed to make it as dark and gritty as possible?
In the beginning, it was dark and gritty. And then later on, it was like gritty and just violent. You know what I'm saying?
Right. It went kind of from gritty and dark to being gritty and kind of bleak.
Yeah. I mean, it's like they reinvented Deep Space Nine in season 4.
Right. That really did the series focused more. Yeah. I mean, now obviously, being it was still the 90s, there was still a lot of story focus in Deep Space Nine and characters mattered, and I get that.
Yeah.
But they it was. Would it be fair to say that Deep Space Nine was sort of the beginning of the transition to the way things are now, with the kind of big action stuff?
Well, yeah, I mean, like I just said, I mean, in season 4, you saw like a reinvention of Deep Space Nine, and I think from that moment on, Star Trek shows primarily kind of focused around as much action as they could squeeze into a story, you know.
So, I'm gonna put a little theme music here for this because it's cool, but I want to do a little segment. I think we can both talk about this in this podcast called "The Two Sides of Deep Space Nine." And that'll come back a little bit later because I wish I had actual theme music I could put in here for this, but I'm improvising here. Yeah. So now that we're on the subject of the two sides of Deep Space Nine, okay, so the first side of it would be 1993, premiered in 93, right?
Yeah, 3, yeah.
And I remember we were watching it, and our VCR was broken, so I didn't get a chance to tape Emissary, so I had to wait until it came out in a syndication in 2 parts.
Yeah.
So anyway, the thing is that the first 2 seasons, basically, I would say that it was, 3 seasons actually, I should say, were basically religion and politics. That was basically the theme of it. You had the Bajorans and you had the Cardassians, and even at that time, Schindler's List had just come out. I saw it as a very overt Holocaust allegory. That's kind of how I saw it. I mean, I don't know if you noticed that, but that's how I picked up.
Yeah.
Going back into old Hollywood again.
Yeah, there you go with the World War II.
That, Hollywood, that was all happening. The Holocaust and Judgment at Nuremberg. That's another one. There was a Judgment at Nuremberg type of thing, and there was an episode that kind of reflected that attitude called Duet, which is actually one of my favorites because it's a bottle show, and it's just Nana Visitor, and who was the guy who played the Cardassian in that? He's been in other things. What's his name? Oh, I'm looking him up right now.
Yeah, I can't remember his name either, but yeah, I remember.
He's been in other shows, but I want to get his name correct. Because I'm sure you're familiar with the episode Duet. It was in the first season. It was a bottle episode, and okay. Yes. Harris Yulin.
Yeah. Okay. That sounds.
He was in Scarface, Clear and Present Danger, The Hurricane. So he was in Frasier a number of times. So he was kind of been around. And what they did is it was basically, it was basically a Holocaust survivor essentially trying a Nazi war criminal. Only they called them Cardassian the Bajorans.
Yep. That's
the whole subtext of it. And when I saw this, I mean, of course, I'm about 13. I thought Nana Visitor acted it to pieces. Now, this was an era where the character of Keira Reeves was basically snarky.
Yeah.
But in this one, you saw other elements of her character: pain, forgiveness. To the point in the end where this guy who had a mistaken identity gets killed because he's a Cardassian, and that's supposed to be reason enough. She's like, no, it's not. So you see this forgiveness and this positive attitude of this character, like, race is not enough of a reason.
Yeah.
You don't know the situation. So, and I gotta be honest with you, this is weird. I kind of preferred Deep Space Nine better that way. It was story oriented.
Yeah.
Sometimes Star Trek, if they really had good writers, they can make a bottle episode that really cooked and made you think.
Yeah.
Going back to TNG, the Drumhead, all on the Enterprise, but put Picard and Gene Simmons together.
Yeah.
So there was a great thing to have Harris Yulin and Nana Visitor playing off each other.
Yeah.
In that kind of way. So yeah, and here's the weird thing. I don't know if you've heard this. A lot of people, and everybody, of course, life is just one big opinion, especially these days. But it is. Life is becoming a big opinion. Usually very supercharged and sometimes violent. But the fact of the matter is, a lot of people find that era of Deep Space Nine a major snooze. And I always kind of preferred it because it linked more to the Next Generation.
Yeah. Which,
as you and I probably realized, was more story oriented.
Right.
It had its action and everything, but and it's just with Deep Space Nine. I think in the beginning they were focused more on the Next Generation thing, only a little bit grittier.
Yeah.
Then in season 4, is it me, or did you notice they just suddenly stopped doing as many of those meaningful stories?
Yeah, it's like the focus shifted from, especially when they introduced the Klingons back as the villains.
Yes.
Everything was about Klingons.
The Tidamar Accord thing up.
Yeah, everything was about the Klingons, and then they stopped really doing the stories about Bajor, and about Kira and stuff that was going on. Every once in a while, they would put like a little update of what was going on there, but that wasn't really the focus anymore. It was about what was coming. The Dominion, the Klingons, and it was always about that. And
then the Klingon thing just was basically like a season and a half arc that just never quite did anything. It was
it went nowhere. It went nowhere.
So basically, what happened is Deep Space Nine became a forum where the writers were manufacturing struggle.
Yeah.
It was. So I mean, looking back on it, it's been. I'm gonna say, was it next year? It's gonna be the 20th anniversary that went off the air, 99.
I think so, yeah.
Looking back on it, 19, 20 years since I last saw it. I was in this room, by the way, when I saw the finale.
Yeah.
I remember I had my TV right over here. I was telling you that the other day. A finale that took 8 episodes to do.
Yeah. Which
brings me into another volume of The Two Sides of Deep Space Nine. And, yeah. And the whole thing about that is the issue of the story arcs. Oh, the story arcs. Boy. I mean, when I look at Deep Space Nine on Netflix, it's up there now. When I look at some of those are actually like 7 and 8 hour episodes. They just separate into segments. And if you look at them, they kind of condense them down into 1 or 2.
Yeah.
The finale of the show was 6 episodes long, basically.
Yeah.
And they were putting in all this information and all this stuff, and at the end of the show, and all these extra things they just had to all of a sudden tie up as if there was nothing to tie up at the beginning.
Yeah.
This relationship between this Dukat and Kai Wynn, which came right out of the friggin' blue.
Yeah, that was
bizarre. Out of nowhere.
Yeah, that was
just
really
so they could solve the problem that didn't need to be there to begin with.
Yeah.
It's not like we didn't see that coming earlier. That just kind of happened out of nowhere.
Yeah.
So they were kind of creating things to create drama in the end of the show, as if we didn't have the Dominion War. We didn't have Odo being infected with a virus that was killing the changelings. We didn't have the changelings being infected by a virus. We didn't have the division between the Dominion and the Cardassians. No, we had to add this bizarre relationship into it.
Yeah.
Which itself took 3 episodes to kind of get into it. So it just, everything... Will you say that after a certain point, Deep Space Nine forgot to tell compact stories?
Yeah, I mean, that's basically, how it felt. I mean, it was just, like you said, I mean, some of the character arcs really kind of got distorted when they switched everything around after season 4, I guess. I mean, it's like you could see where they were kind of going and, up to that point. And then everything kind of shifted. And now the character arcs kind of went in a different way, and it was like, you didn't expect it to go this way or something, and then it was, I don't know, it just felt weird after that,
Right. I mean, now that we've kind of done at least 3 parts of The Two Sides of Deep Space Nine, I wanted to ask you, this is an idea I've been having, unexplored directions of Deep Space Nine, and I wanted to kind of throw ideas off of you about this, and you could throw ideas off of me. One idea that I had is, suppose they didn't introduce the Dominion at all. Suppose that did not happen. Suppose Odo met his people and there was no Dominion. They were just aliens he met.
Yeah.
Okay. Suppose that the Bajorans and the Cardassians united on missions into the Gamma Quadrant to meet new life forms. Suppose they took that route with it. That's just an idea.
You see, the tension is still there. You take the Dominion out of it, and you still have the tension between the Bajorans and the Cardassians.
Exactly, because that conflict, that little word of the time was.
I mean, if conflict was so important to the writers at that time, why they didn't
already built into the show.
Why they didn't pursue that avenue to its, and instead of having this this foreign thing coming in and then kind of joining up with the Cardassians and making this big, I mean, it's like it was too dramatic, it's like, it wasn't enough that the Cardassians were kind of on everybody's neck all the time. We got to put some guns into this thing, we got to, let's bring some, troops to slaughter,
I mean, this may seem, but it almost seems like the stereotypical domain of a 13-year-old boy.
Yeah.
I mean, it almost seems like that stereotype of that young, presumably Caucasian American male who is fighting with somebody over the bow and arrow or the sandbox. It's not a very adult mentality. How can we make this thing work better? Let's blow things up.
Well, you see, the thing of it is they had the Maquis. Okay. Now, when we
bring that in, and that could be a conflict from within.
We had what the Next Generation had left us was they had agreed to a treaty that nobody liked. Okay.
Right, that set up the Maquis to begin with.
That's how you set up the conflict in Deep Space Nine, with the Bajorans, the Cardassians, the Federation, all trying to work around this bad treaty that was made. And to the extent all the way into the end of the show, that could have been like the focus of how at the end they all managed to work together. The treaty as it is doesn't matter anymore because now they can work together.
Right, and you could still do a lot of interesting things. Like I mean, it didn't. People were saying, "Oh, it's all taking place on the station." Never mind having to defy it.
The border was right near the station. Part of the treaty. Yeah.
If they had a Cardassian space station, the Federation could have used, I don't know if the Bajorans have them, a bigger Bajoran star to explore the Gamma Quadrant with.
Yeah.
Like if Tom Paris could build the Delta Flyer in the Delta Quadrant, could you imagine what they could do in the Alpha Quadrant?
Yeah.
They could have taken a Bajoran ship and made this hybrid ship out of it, and they could have sent Cardassian and Federation and Bajorans together into the Gamma Quadrant to explore on missions and then do things like that. They could have just kept that Bajoran Cardassian aesthetic involved in the show.
Yeah, there was plenty of stories to write about because
you could still have Gul Dukat be the bad guy.
Yeah,
you could still have that happen. You could still keep all of that, but you wouldn't add in too many cooks to the kitchen. When you bring in the Dominion, it's just you get all these changelings and Jem'Hadar. You get all these cooks in.
Yeah, it was too much when they bring the Dominion into the story.
Right, and then so yeah, I do agree. There was is there any other? Do you think that would have been a good unexplored direction for Deep Space Nine if they just kept it kind of as it was going in the first 3 years?
It's like they gave up on the original concept of what this show was supposed to be at the beginning. Because I think what was going on, and I don't know, I don't have the numbers in front of me, but the ratings didn't seem to be happy enough with CBS. At the time, I don't know if it was because they thought there weren't enough viewers watching it. It was a different time for television, but
the Hollywood thing we just mentioned.
They figured that maybe putting in a little more action would draw more of an audience. Maybe, I don't know. But the thing of it is that these shows take time to develop. Okay, I mean, if they wanted to put more action, all they had to do was heat up the story as it was. To go into season 4, they didn't have to introduce any new villains into this thing. They had plenty of villains to go around. And it was like, the thing about the Maquis was really heating up at that time, and I think it was right around then when the Voyager had to spin off.
Right, and if I understand, the Maquis were contrived for the sake of Voyager.
Yeah.
They were created. They were started in the Next Generation as a concept, and they were created as an entity in Deep Space Nine for the purpose of appearing in Voyager. All could have happened. All that happened. Voyager could have happened.
So there was a logical chain of events going on, which they needed to pick up on that treaty that was signed, because that was something that was started in the Next Generation, and it was repeated with the Maquis and Deep Space Nine. They needed to have some kind of resolution with that, which they never did. All it ended up was all the Cardassians at the end finally get so defeated they ain't got much anything left. So now the treaty doesn't matter. But it was like, well, that's just too much of a childish kind of way to just end it all. It's like, well, we'll just blow everything up and it's all settled.
Yeah, like I said, it's like it's an easy way to get money, Yeah. You want to get money? Make explosions sell.
Yeah. Just
and of course, here we are.
And none of your story ideas don't matter anymore because everybody's dead. So it's like, this is ridiculous. What? Why not work this thing out?
Yeah, Star Wars, you can come over here for a minute. I know you're over there waiting, but we talked about this with The Last Jedi.
Yeah.
How, how do we deal with the future of Star Wars? Just burn all the old Jedi scrolls and be done with it.
Yeah. Jedis don't matter anymore. Yeah.
Same basic attitude. Cynical Luke burns all the stuff. So Star Wars, you can go back over there. Good Star Wars.
Yeah.
I just, it's cute.
Yeah.
But when we're dealing with the two sides of Deep Space Nine,
yeah,
you do have that thing where it's like, let's just get rid of all the old stuff and pretend it didn't happen.
Yeah.
And you don't throw away the past, you learn from it. And that's, I think, what happened with Deep Space Nine. They tried to reject their entire past for the sake of a brand new idea.
Yeah.
And how many times in history and in fiction have we seen that just not work in the long term?
Mm.
I mean, you can look at events.
It was the birth of a different Star Trek began there, I think, on season 4.
Exactly. And I totally agree with you. I think it began the
culture the movies
right now.
The movies after that in that period all switched around too. They stopped doing the kind of like Generations thing. Remember how that was? It was
exactly. First Contact came out.
First Contact with all this.
That came out right around the time they introduced that.
With Worf, because the Defiant was in that movie and everything. So,
and that's when you introduced angry First Blood Picard.
Yeah.
Right, with a machine gun, I can tip my eye rolls. Oh, come on.
Yeah. Lethal Weapon Picard.
Right, exactly. This is, you could do a National Lampoon's parody. Jean-Luc Picard, loaded weapon. It was basically. It was overactive testosterone.
That season 4 attitude got carried over into the movies, and it kind of ruined it from that point on.
So, like I said, it was like turning Picard into an action star, turning Deep Space Nine from a political drama into explosions.
War drama instead.
Right. Well, war drama and explosions as much as possible. I think during that, was it before? No, it was before they blew up the school in Keiko. But there were explosions then, but they started blowing things up, and let's see how many explosions we can have. Oh, yes, and bringing in Dukat having a love child and all this stuff. They were adding. What ended up happening is that by the time you end up at the end, in the middle of the show, you have what was originally 3 or 4 plot points. Then you have about 20 or 30 plot points.
Yeah.
And now you got to try to bring them all together and make them make sense. And
it was almost impossible.
Right. Because, like I said, when you have that many cooks in the kitchen, it becomes an unmanageable enterprise, and everything just kind of falls apart.
That's why the last episode of Deep Space Nine really isn't the last episode, because nothing.
It's the conclusion of an 8-part story arc that took, and then they added stuff into that, like the Dukat and Win thing.
Threads left hanging at the end. It was like you guys could do another 5 or 6 years out of this thing. You haven't finished nothing. Another
element you brought up with Deep Space Nine that really has nothing to do with old Hollywood. I just want to mention that now. It's kind of, I don't know what it was. It was interesting in the beginning of the show, but the way they dealt with it was kind of strange. If you want to talk about the two sides of Deep Space Nine, is Sisko as a religious icon. Yeah. Okay, where do I start with this? You actually brought up a good point that you felt this bogged down the character of Ben Sisko.
Yeah.
He was supposed to be a Federation commander who was administrating. He later got to be a rank of captain. And he had responsibilities as a Starfleet officer to try to delegate all this complication. But he's also an emissary to another alien race's prophets. And we've established in Star Trek before, that usually, go back to the Next Generation a little bit. Deep Space Nine, you can wait over here while Next Generation comes in. Your predecessor. They had an episode called Who Watches the Watchers, where Picard deliberately and wholeheartedly resists a primitive race, embracing him as a god figure.
Yeah.
So Sisko comes in, and they tell him that, well, you're the emissary of the purpose. Oh, well, I'm okay with that, but I'm also a Starfleet, so this is a little conflict. Picard completely resisted it. Sisko could have stood up there and said, I will not bring the Bajorans back to an age of ignorance and fear.
Yeah.
But he didn't. He totally embraced it for some reason.
Yeah.
I don't know if it was a compulsion or what. They just never really defined it. And a friend of mine did a video. Steve Shies, I've mentioned him before. Shout out to you, Steve. And he has a YouTube channel. He does a segment called Trek Actually. Mm-hmm. And he kind of inspired this idea. And I wanted to ask you this. You know how Cisco was often telling his son and people they should tolerate the Bajoran religion and not treat it like something stupid?
Hmm.
Okay. Did you notice that in the two sides of Deep Space Nine, if you go into the second part of Deep Space Nine, when the Jem'Hadar get introduced, have you ever noticed how Cisco went out of his way to ridicule the Vorta and the Jem'Hadar for worshiping the founders?
Yeah.
Little bit of a writing gap there, isn't there?
Yeah.
Because, I mean, he's talking religious tolerance to the Bajorans and to the Federation, yet he is being totally religiously intolerant to the Jem'Hadar and the Vorta.
Yeah.
Two species that did not need to be developed in the first place, I should say that. That Dominion thing didn't even need to be there.
Yeah.
But all of a sudden, he's like, well, I don't tolerate your religion. I don't care if it comes to another. I don't tolerate it. I don't like it.
Yeah.
Just because you're our enemy. And again, that goes with World War II. I mean, if you look back at a lot of World War II propaganda, a lot of issues that are leveled against the Japanese are against the Shinto religion itself. Okay? So, again, all of a sudden, you start out with a contemporary political drama, sci-fi drama in the first season, in the first 3 seasons, and in the 4th through 7th season, all of a sudden it becomes retro World War II.
Yeah. Yeah.
With all the prejudices and all the closed-mindedness included. But did you notice that? Did you notice how Sisko's attitude about the Bajorans and their religion was very different from how he treated the Dominion?
Yeah, and I think the writers tried to, how do I say it? They tried to shoehorn in the idea that Starfleet didn't like the idea that Sisko was.
Yeah, they kind of just threw that in there as like a little.
Yeah, it's sort of like, yeah, we still have our Starfleet ideals here,
Yeah,
but it's okay if you want to break them.
It's kind of
okay.
sprinkled on. It isn't heavy.
It's okay if you want to break them. Just we're not backing it, but because they wanted to bring Bajor into the Federation, which meant at all costs, apparently.
So it's almost like they're snidely patronizing Sisko's thing with the emissary.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And
he never indicated that he didn't respect their religion at all.
no, he didn't.
But then with the Dominion, it's like, oh, the founders aren't God. I don't like your religion. You're terrible. And he was always picking on them. And it's like, you have double standards for the Dominion just because they happen to be your current enemy. Where we go back to Next Generation again, here we go, where we have an episode called The Drumhead. Simon Tarsis. Picard is saying, do we condemn a man because he has the blood of a current enemy?
Yeah.
Would Sisko have done that?
Yeah.
You're a Romulan. Out the hatch. I mean, no. So, it's funny how there's the writing. And with Sisko, we've established from the very beginning of Deep Space Nine that he's a very ethical character, similar to Picard. Why would he throw ethics away just for the sake of a foreign war?
Here's the thing, you want to talk about throwing ethics away. I mean, here's the man that had a Romulan ambassador set up to be killed just to drag an entire government into a war. I mean,
you had to mention that episode, didn't you? Oh.
Yeah, I mean, it's like, look, you guys, you people, you created this character, and he's supposed to be, a futuristic version of, of humanity with ethics, and yet, as soon as a war breaks out, we're already going back to breaking our own rules, crossing our own, stuff like that. And it just seemed like, you guys are trashing Sisko. I mean, you got two sides.
You're referring to the Pale Moonlight, aren't you?
You had two sides to Sisko. You had this, this complex religious thing going on, and then you had this guy that was, didn't really stand very firm on his Starfleet.
Right. So on one side, you had this guy who was supposed to be super ethical and all this, and then you have the two sides of Sisko.
Yeah.
You've got the other side of him, who for the sake of, and that was one episode, by the way, that you mentioned. It was one episode, which I don't go back to.
Yeah.
I can even tell my absolute love for it. My sarcasm is very weak on this one.
Yeah.
Because, I mean, it's like, all of a sudden, we're going to make Sisko into a totally unethical mass murderer for an episode. And then the next one's like, oh, I'm back.
I can't tell you how much flack I get from saying he's a war criminal. They're like, how do you say that? It's like, well, look, when you commit a crime in a time of war, and you're in the military, that's like a war crime. Well, and that's what he did.
I mean, it's right there, black and white. So it's like, with Sisko, I mean, I wonder why, if that didn't come up again in his career, that one episode thing. Because, I mean, you mentioned that, and they never carried that on.
Yeah, they never picked up that thread after that. It was like this one surprise episode, and then, it's supposed to delete the entire log.
I know I've heard of this, but to me, In the Pale Moonlight was the Naked Now of Deep Space Nine.
Yeah.
It should never have happened.
Yeah.
It was like, we got to make Cisco another go for 45 minutes, and then in the end, it's like, oh, okay, I shot this little video I'm making off. I'm all right. I'm all ethical. I'm all wonderful.
Yeah, I can live with it. The end.
Right, and it's like, what was this evil mirror Cisco for a minute here?
Yeah, it was like, this is the mirror universe Cisco.
I mean, he's supposed to have died, but is the Cisco separated a transporter accident, and the evil side is going around killing Romulan ambassadors? It's like, okay, the good Cisco come back in the next episode. I mean, that was just bizarre.
They couldn't come up. You mean to tell me the writers couldn't come up with a better way to bring?
Yeah, that was.
I mean, come on.
Me, and this is subjective. People usually pick the first 3 seasons of Deep Space Nine. Move Along Home is their least favorite episode.
Yeah.
That was weird, but not my least favorite. In the Pale Moonlight was my least favorite. It wasn't that it was not well acted or anything, and the plot wasn't interesting.
It's a good story, but for a different sci-fi.
It was just morally bankrupt.
Yeah.
And it didn't fit the Cisco character at all.
Yeah.
At all. It just took any ethics he had away from him.
It even changed Garrick around a little bit too in that episode. I mean, it just
we had Garrick a little bit later, but he's another thing we're going to talk about.
Yeah, I mean, we had a hint, about his spying past and stuff like that, but to see him actively threatening somebody, if you open and then he has the person killed that helped him make the stupid fake thing. And then it's
that was just the characterizations in that were all.
Why wasn't he doing this stuff all along? Why is it only now we're making Garrick into an assistant murderer or something like that? It's like,
I mean, the episode could have been totally redeemed if in the end, you saw Cisco looking at himself in a holodeck saying "Computer or holosuite, computer and program and Dominion Battle Tactic Simulation 2."
Yeah.
It looked more like a battle tactic simulation they would be doing.
Yeah.
But as a real episode, it's unmanageable within the show. It's
out of place. It's out of place. It doesn't belong in the.
So, like I said, that's why whenever I had it on the VHS tapes, whenever I see it on the show, I skip right past it. I just can't.
You know what? And he did it a second time when they were having problems with Gowron. Remember, he was sitting there sending all his Klingons out to fight, and they were all slaughtering and everything. And then he tells Worf, "We got to do something about this." And the two of them. I mean, the way the director had it, like they both were thinking the same thing, but they weren't saying it. In other words, he wanted Worf to go in and challenge Gowron.
Worf actually killed Gowron?
I think Cisco put the idea in Worf's head. We need to stop this, and you need.
But again, that was more of an implicit thing, like Worf, where Cisco's like, "Well, I'm not going to make you do this, but I think you know what I mean."
Yeah, it's sort of like that. Like there was an unspoken order given to Worf, and
but he couldn't directly give the order. So. No. And then Deep Space Nine throws in this thing. They have this thing with Bashir, and do we have to go into Section 31? I know.
That was something else they didn't need in that show.
A big thing they didn't need.
Yeah.
Here is exactly how I think the Section 31 conversation went. We over here need to make some of the X-Files money. That's what I think that was. I think that was like, because if you look at the time that was on, you had X-Files, you had its distant cousin, Psi Factor. I don't remember that show.
You had on USA they had La Femme Nikita, which was sort of
Nikita. Like, yep.
I mean, they were borrowing from different things.
So I mean, you had the whole kind of conspiracy theory stuff happening.
Yeah.
Kind of shadow government kind of stories happening. So, all of a sudden they're like, okay, we got to bring some of that in Deep Space Nine by inserting this organization. As far as I'm concerned, this may sound very theatrical, but I always looked at that and felt like somewhere, wherever his ashes are in the cosmos, Gene Roddenberry's ashes are spinning in space over this.
Yeah.
This is totally against what he wanted.
He never would have approved that.
Oh, no. No. I mean, and this is a little metaphor for not watching something, but I felt like, you know what? If this is Deep Space Nine Season 6, I got to sit down on the show now. This is too much.
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden this conversation like, well, this all makes sense because, the Romulans have the Tal Shiar, the Cardassians have the... No, Odo, it does not make sense.
Yeah.
You're not a Federation officer. You don't know how the Federation is structured. And now they've added this little gizmo into there where every time we go back to the beginning of the Federation, now Section 31 is going to be looming over. You watch
TOS. They had an organization that was called Starfleet Security. Why did they have to come up with a super secret?
Right, it was utterly unnecessary. It was just... So like I said, you have like 4 or 5 elements in the 2 sides of Deep Space Nine that did not need to happen.
Yeah.
They just did not need to occur. And Section 31 was the biggie.
Yeah.
Because, it may seem cynical to you, but when I watch this, I'm like, they're trying to make X-Files money. This is money. This has nothing to do with writing. They're trying to, we have a billion-dollar TV show over on Fox.
Yeah.
Deep Space Nine ain't doing that well. They want to bring in that cash.
Yeah.
And I don't think it really did. I mean, viewers can pick up copycatting like that usually.
Oh, yeah.
They're doing it today. I mean,
yeah, if you watch a lot of TV, you'll see it.
I mean, you and I talk about it. Viewers aren't the idiots they take them for. Serious people who are into things. I mean, like I said, you try to fool a Star Wars fan with some nonsense.
Yeah.
You just try. Star Trek fans, they're going to know it.
They're going to know.
And then I remember around that time, they released a series of pocketbooks about Section 31 involving Kirk, involving Picard.
Trying to fill it in as much as
they can. You just pretty much put vinegar into the milk of Star Trek.
Yeah, and they're trying to say, oh, it's always been there. It's always been bullshit.
Right, so why don't you just take Star Trek Remastered and just slap a bunch of Section 31 agents kind of walking around the Connie? Really?
Yeah.
Like, when they do those scenes, you see them lurking around the shadows, looking around, and just, I don't know, I mean, come on. It was just
at the end of the day, after they had done tampering what's already been done, it won't even look anything like what we started with.
Right. And then with Enterprise, they started slapping Section 31 into that.
Yes, yeah.
So it's like, oh, don't bring that up again. That was just, see, my idea of Section 31 was I wanted to think that guy, what was his name, Sloan, that a lot of it was kind of in his mind. I wanted to hope it was just some guy
working alone,
4th century conspiracy theorist who had a few people who was in on with him, and it wasn't some big thing. Where they brought in an Enterprise, I'm like, oh, shut up, leave it alone, it's stupid.
Yeah.
It just, if you do it once, don't bring something stupid back again.
Here's the thing that they were framing with Deep Space Nine, is that after everything that we saw on Next Generation, that humanity was really doing pretty well. Deep Space Nine comes along and says, no, it's not doing well at all. And how did they do it? They had this whole faction of people that were saying, we need to go back to the way things were.
So here's my Guinan reaction to Q on that.
Yeah, and then you
That's how I feel about that.
You had the Section 31 thing, and then you had, remember those people that left Earth and they were trying to start, this little colony somewhere, and when
the ones on Ryza.
Yeah, well, not on Ryza, but remember when Cisco and O'Brien show up and with the runabout and stuff, and they were trying to
they're kind of off the grid people.
Yeah, and they were like, we have
the ones who were putting people in those boxes for punishment.
Yeah, and it's like, so Earth was so bad that they had to leave it and start this dictatorship kind of thing.
I mean, if they had done that with like one fanatical woman, that's what it was. I said, okay, that's one fanatical cult person. I mean, we have those people like that.
They were trying to show that humanity was falling apart at the very foundation of what made Star Trek.
But like I said, here's where this gets interesting, because this could be a potentially sad conversation, but I'll try to find some humor in it now that we're talking about the two sides of Deep Space Nine.
Yeah.
We have to look a little bit at the era Deep Space Nine was created in. There's a Netflix show. They have a series they have the 70s, they have the 80s, and they have the 90s. I got to tell you, because having lived through it, I can't bear to watch the 90s series. Okay. You go from Rodney King up to Columbine. One assault after another.
Yeah.
It just seemed like an assault on everybody. I really am not convinced the creative people at that time were at all happy, were at all content. It had hardly any semblance of Gene Roddenberry's positive future left in them. And I think that with Deep Space Nine, as it went along, instead of showing, as it did in the beginning, I think, how to bring hope out of hopelessness, it just kind of stayed hopeless.
Yeah, it said, why bother?
And it eventually became very cynical and just a capture of the zeitgeist of that time. And I remember at that time, and I've been thinking about talking about this. I actually threw in the towel when that Klingon thing you mentioned happened. And I said, you know what? I'm 16, but forget it. I'm going to write my own Star Trek stuff now. I mean, I actually thought about that. And I actually tried to protest the situation through my writing. And I, in fact, have not officially continued it because I'm letting things go as they may. And I couldn't find a way not to add that. I've thought about it because, obviously you think that, well, people may take your idea, but that was something I was doing then. Yeah. Because I looked at this series and I said, you get these great characters in the show that you could expand on and do wonderful things with, and you're using them as foil to essentially tear the fabric of what I love about Star Trek and what people I know love about it to bits.
Yeah. Now,
So,
you got to remember when TOS era, when things looked hopeless, Star Trek came onto the scene with hope.
right, exactly. They were pumping
Yeah.
it back in. They were bringing the hope back into the show.
Yeah.
So, and with Next Generation, I mean, granted the times were not as hopeless, but still, they were on during the Gulf War. So, they were, again, kind of pumping back some hope. And, I mean, I'm going back to the drumhead again. Picard said, well, there'll be somebody like this Admiral Sarti who's going to spread fear. But he never indicated it would be a whole cross-section of humans.
Yeah, he would say we would know what they were. If we were smart, we can stop it.
Right, but it'll be, like I said, with that Deep Space Nine episode with that woman, it'll be that one person who's going to step over the line.
Yeah.
It's not Section 31.
Yeah.
Not like a whole organization that's just going to step over the line just to create drama.
So, I mean, basically, they're trying to say that every time somebody that was doing something duplicitous had to be associated with Section 31. It's like, well, why that?
Section 31?
Why can't it be just the person making a bad mistake? Why does it have to be somebody associated with a group, a cabal here of friggin', Starfleet terrorists that's going around trying to put the monkey wrench into everything that's being done?
Right. So, I mean, and to be honest with you, again, you could kind of take that back to old Hollywood, because during World War II, there was also an era of conspiracy theorizing. Don't tell your commanding officer this because the enemy might be listening, or these spies, blah, 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 espionage and all that. So they brought that into it, plus mixed with this X-Files thing that was happening at that time.
Yeah.
It just like, basically, at the end of Deep Space Nine, you started the series with people who didn't trust each other and grew to trust each other. And at the end, it's like, well, you shouldn't trust each other again.
Yeah.
Shouldn't we have grown into this Star Trek family? And I think Deep Space Nine should have started out about mistrust and grown into a place of love and comradeship.
Yeah, at the end, yeah.
Where everybody, well, I think they sort of did in a way, but still.
It's how they got there that I didn't like. It's how they got to that point.
We've talked about this before. I'm going to mention this. It's unpopular right now. The Cosby Show quote about that wonderful steak on a trash can lid.
Yeah, the trash can lid thing, yeah.
Yes, that's how I feel about this stuff at Deep Space Nine. It was that steak on a trash can lid. Deep Space Nine was that wonderful steak served to us on a trash can lid in the end.
Yeah.
It could have been served on a nice plate. It was in the beginning. And then they said, forget that plate. Here's a trash can lid to put it on.
It's like they didn't want to put the effort into continuing what they started. They just gave up on it.
The presentation of it should have been something else. And I know it's one of the most controversial Star Trek series, probably just for that reason.
Yeah.
That, it is that. Although,
well, you had told me that there was just as much controversy going on behind the camera as there was in front of it,
Well, I mean, I was reading an article off Quora from a number of different sources. I probably have to check them, where it explained that the cast had trouble getting along. There were issues with Avery Brooks. They were almost Shatner-like. Well, not as extreme as Shatner. I mean, he never had those special moments that Shatner had in the third season. Which I'm glad about, because that would have made Deep Space Nine very different.
Yeah.
I mean, I wouldn't have wanted to see Cisco at the end of Deep Space Nine being, it's me. I don't think anybody could do that but Shatner, really.
Yeah.
I think that was his domain. I never saw Picard do anything like that.
I mean, Avery had his style of acting, that's for sure.
He did, but, mostly his thing was, if he was doing his Captain Cisco thing, he was just basically a very curt leader. But when he was a religious figure, all of a sudden he became operatic.
Yeah.
But never. Never
wild. He wasn't wild like that. It was like
totally off the rails. I mean, now that whole thing with that Romulan assassination was creepy, but the thing with Deep Space Nine, I think by then, is the presentation was more. I never had any problem with the acting per se. I never had any problem with the characterizations. The problem I had with a lot of Deep Space Nine was the way things were written out.
Yeah.
The presentation of it.
Yeah.
We went to this before. I'm not going to mention this because we mentioned it in another video. the O'Brien must suffer trope.
Oh God, O'Brien.
we mentioned that. A good character in the Next Generation.
I like, by the way. O'Brien is a character I like.
Right, and he was meant to be that likable character, except they made him into the whipping boy of the show.
Yeah.
Especially because he was tied down to a wife who's paying
respect to the word
just to screw up his life. just to do everything, and it's like it's just the chemistry wasn't there. You could see it.
Yeah.
And it's just, it's in the Star Trek universe where everything's supposed to be all positive. It's very sad to see a very stereotypical mid-90s detached, alienated relationship in the future.
Yeah.
I mean, and it was detached. It was totally detached. We mentioned that before. But you're absolutely right. It didn't quite come together. They had this war going on. They had this conflict there. You would have thought they would have come together and been like, we got to be a strong couple in the middle of this thing.
Yeah.
But it never happened. She went away. He didn't seem to care.
Yeah, she was off anywhere. I don't know where the hell she was half the
time. What
ended
up happening is O'Brien's social position on the ship became more about him being Bashir's pal.
Yeah.
Which worked way better than him and Keiko.
The wife and the child thing really didn't belong at that point because
he had chemistry with Bashir. He didn't with Keiko.
Yeah.
It became weird that the show became more about his bromance with Bashir than it did with his romantic affiliation with Keiko as a husband.
Wife. Yeah, exactly.
And there was even a point I remember where she kind of tried to bring them back together. Which is almost like, you're better off being his friend than you are being my wife, so just go off with him and I'll go away.
Yeah.
This marriage has no point. I mean, as much as I would hate to see if they killed her off, I don't think anybody would have really cared at a certain point.
I know I wouldn't have, because I was sick of her, would
have left 2 children motherless, but still, I mean, that would have added, of course, another layer of conflict. But my goodness, she got so useless. And I think that, if you look at Deep Space Nine, it's like they were trying to create all this stuff, but they left all these little useless ends. They didn't turn Keiko into anybody significant.
Yeah.
They never gave her a significant point. They could have made her a significant plot point in this whole Bajoran fiasco, but
as an actress, what's the point? I mean, you're just getting a paycheck if you're going to do that kind of a role. So they didn't need her. There was no character arc. It was just, I'm here, I'm being bitchy, now I'm gone. It's like, well, what the hell?
Well, like I said, she was pretty much useless on most of Deep Space Nine.
That's right. It was just a paycheck role.
And I remember in the end, when she and O'Brien are moving back to Earth, it almost seems like things are getting a little bit better. It's weird. It's almost like, you wondered if Keiko was going to say, you know what? Being on the station really screwed up our marriage.
Yeah, I got the sort of the hint that maybe it was more her idea than his to go back to Earth. It's like,
she didn't like it there from the beginning.
Yeah, she didn't want to be there. And I think he finally gave in and said, fine, we'll go back to Earth and I'll just be a teacher or something like that. It was more her idea to break up, Bashir and him, or something like that, just to get away from the station.
Yeah, I know. I think that, as a wife, Keiko does come off from the beginning as a little morally questionable.
Yeah.
Going back to the Next Generation, getting Data to break off the wedding for her like that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, you look back at it, it's like they could have written that character in a more positive way.
Yeah.
It's Star Trek's first
wander around as a friend. I'd say, get the heck out of my face, basically.
So, yeah, we discussed that though before, so I wouldn't get too deep into that. Yeah. But I wanted to, when I talk about the 2 sides of Deep Space Nine, I wanted to mention another thing about the first side that I noticed early on, but I expanded on, and you didn't notice. And that's the character of Garrick.
Yeah.
Now, I was segueing into a video, but this has to do with one episode called Past Prologue.
Now, this was like in the first season, right?
It was the first episode of the show after Emissary.
That's right, yeah.
Bashir is sitting in the quarks, and this Cardassian comes out of nowhere and starts... well, remember, I'm 13 watching this, and, I know about spy junk at that point. Yeah. But this guy's making little flirty eyes at Bashir, and Bashir's kind of trying not to notice. And it's not like, oh, I'm a spy trying to size you up. It's something else. And I'm trying to wonder if it is or what it isn't. And he's saying to him all this stuff like, well, I'm a tailor, blah, 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 blah. And Bashir, of course, in his young mind, and they established a million times he was the young doctor.
Yeah.
Remember they kept saying he was young the whole season? Oh, how's our young doctor? Young. We're going to establish that he was a kid, basically, that he was a naive, wild-eyed kid.
Yeah, green as can be.
Yeah, I want to be where the adventure is. I'm going to be a hero on this ship, which he was. But anyway, the point is that as he grew up,
Yeah.
for me, he's like, oh, I'm going to be big Mr. Man out here. But anyway, so he ends up with this guy, and he's touching him on the shoulder, Garrick, and saying, oh, I can't tell how interesting, how it is to meet such an interesting new companion. And Bashir just look at his face, and you're wondering what it is. But his assumption, being so into his being young, is like, I'm being seduced by the spy who wants to get information out of me, which is kind of where they took the character. But in the beginning, there was, to me, very obvious flirtation. And I'm going to bring this up because I didn't know this at the time either, but as I grew to understand old Hollywood, one of the big things of this Hays Code I just talked about was don't even think about same-sex looks. Two men shouldn't look at each other. Don't even shake the hands. Don't get within a foot. If you're women and there's a possibility of a lesbian relationship, one of them is going to die.
Yeah.
Period. There was no exception to that. Now, Alfred Hitchcock would come along and he would flirt with that to pieces and in every film have some gay/lesbian reference in it, but put it in the guise of a villain. So you couldn't really tell it was there. And they even had movies where they have totally lesbian characters, but they have to be vampires.
Yeah.
And in The Maltese Falcon, they had a character who, in the book, was discussed as being gay, but in the movie, Peter Lorre just displayed him as being kind of deceptive.
Yeah.
And that's what I think Garrick was. That gay character in the 1990s, when it was still rough to be able to come out on television, who was the spy, who was the villain. An old Hollywood trope, but if you look, and now Garrick's character arc, he had a father who disapproved of him, Anabrin Tain.
Right.
There was a lot of conversation about it, but why exactly did he disapprove of him? And here's a theory that I had, and even Andrew J. Robinson touched on it a little bit, and there's even a book that kind of leads into some of this a little bit. I think that Garrick was an LGBTQ character. I think he did have a crush on Bashir. And I think that because the Cardassians were very militaristic and patriarchal, they would have seen homosexuality, or gay men as being weak.
As weak.
And I think that, I think there was a missed opportunity there to tell the story about a gay son being rejected by his father.
Yeah.
I would have loved to have seen that story. That would have been so Star Trek.
Yeah, I mean, it would have gave a new perspective on
They
Garrick.
hinted and they hinted and they hinted, and it's like being powdered with fleas to me.
Yeah.
This character is gay, and they're not saying it.
I don't think the TV execs and all that would have allowed that.
Well, there was a gay subtext on Deep Space Nine, but it was very distant. It was the whole thing with the trill.
Yeah, I mean,
but it was so distant.
Remember I told you before, it's easier to put two women, having sex.
Right, but that's another old trope.
Because, for men, that's a turn on to see two women doing stuff like that.
Right, or the idea with women is that even if you're homophobic, you can say, oh, well, that's just a phase, or if the right man came along.
Yeah.
But
you just don't want to go the other way with it, because that's like...
But with male sexuality with other men, it's threatening. And that's why I think they played Garrick's attraction toward Bashir as threatening.
Yeah.
And Bashir read it as an overt threat rather than a flirt.
Now, from my perspective, and I didn't know about that, what you're talking about originally, but when I watched it, that went right over my head, and I was like, I just figured it's just, him being a spy, trying to recruit, a fellow, into his way of thinking, basically. But until you brought this up, and you had evidence to back it up, because you said the actor himself had spelled all this out.
Well, yes, and it's actually in the scene itself.
Yeah, it was put in the scene, but they dropped it and they twisted it around for a different way.
Even what they did with it, even in past prologue, it's in the scene.
Yeah,
there was no need for the little secret smiles and putting his hands on his shoulder very sensuously. I mean, it's something I could see. And, at that point, I still knew in the 90s, there was still kind of, like I said, with women at that time, like in movies like Basic Instinct or The Crying Game, you could have kind of feminine, sexuality like that. And a lot of it had to do with lingerie and posing and, that kind of thing. But to have male characters that had any sensuality toward each other was it was seen as predatory. It was
Yeah.
it was it was this terrible thing. And like I said, Bashir even seemed a little uncomfortable. But I mean, what if they, instead of Bashir saying that, oh well, he's a spy and he's trying to get information, what if he said, Commander Sisko, this is Cardassian on the station, he's trying to come on to me.
Yeah.
I mean, what
Yeah,
conversation do you have from that?
Yeah.
I mean, I would have loved to have seen that conversation happen. I could write that conversation. I'd love to go back and rewrite past prologue another way.
Yeah.
Like, that's what he does, and says, this Cardassian is making the moves on me, but I'm making the moves on that cute Krill with the spots.
Yeah.
What am I going to do? I mean, I would have loved to have seen that conversation. Because remember Gene Roddenberry wanted to do Blood and Fire back in the 80s?
Yeah.
And they said, no, not now.
Yeah.
Not during AIDS. No.
Yeah.
But, then it's like, that was before Ellen DeGeneres came out, and again, we're women here, or Matthew Shepard getting murdered. I mean, that would have been an interesting thing to put into that time. I think that would have been daring of Deep Space Nine, and it might have made the ratings actually better.
Well, yeah, because it would have been the first time they had a character that, like for me, that I didn't get, and then all of a sudden it's like a realization, oh, so that's what was going on all the time. You know what I'm saying? It's like you got to kind of get a litlittle bit misled a little bit, but then you reveal he comes out to Bashir.
Well, that's an old Hollywood trope.
Oh, that's what this was all about.
In old Hollywood,
Yeah.
Characters who were male characters who were gay were always portrayed as characters that didn't have a sexuality.
That's right.
Like if you watch Maltese Falcon, Peter Lorre there, if you read the book Maltese Falcon, he's playing a very obviously gay character who has a boyfriend. But in the movie, he cannot have that. So he comes off as a villain who's a seductive spy. Even though he's trying to pretend he isn't making Google Eyes at Bogey, which he is. But I mean, and that's like with Garrick. It's like, I knew my spy junk. I knew how seductive spies could be to recruit people. But there was a romantic element here. And there was this thing between him and Narbrin Tain was like, what is it about you, Garrick, that a Narbrin Tain disapproves of?
Yeah.
And this Taylor thing, I mean, could you bring in that whole thing that, the whole thing about gay people as hairdressers and stuff, and I mean, could that all be kind of implicit? I mean, it was all like an old Hollywood implication of it.
Yeah.
Like, the gay character in the 1950s as the hairdresser or the head of the decorating establishment.
Yeah.
Not saying it, just kind of like, well, I want to accept my son, but he's a folk singer or he's a librarian or anything emasculated.
Yeah.
So that's what I think of as Garrick. He's a tailor.
Yeah.
But he's a spy, sort of. But his father still doesn't accept him for some reason. They're just not saying. And so, like I said, that was like, with all this stuff with the Dominion and all that, why didn't you go there with Garrick? Why didn't you make that character challenge something that wasn't being challenged at that time?
Yeah.
Why didn't you just take that high road and take the controversy across the brow and say, you know what, this is Star Trek here?
I mean, look, how much more controversial could it have been than having the first interracial kiss, right? During the 60s.
That's debated now. I'm sure you've heard about that. That's debated.
I'm just saying they went there back in those days. They went there with it.
Right, in the 60s, that was still daring to do, yeah.
Yeah, but they didn't. They chickened out.
Albeit not the best Star Trek TOS episode, but...
yeah, I know. But I'm just saying, when they wanted to go there, they had the guts to do it. But with Deep Space Nine, they didn't do it.
In the 90s, it was like, you had the stage set. Why didn't you let people dance?
Yeah.
You had the dancers up. Why didn't you let them do their dance?
Yeah.
I mean, I would have loved to have seen Garrick develop like that. Oh, and Zial, remember her? The love trial we discussed?
Oh, yes. Yep.
They had this implication that, she was going to kind of make the moves on Garrick. And then he had about as much reaction to her as a dead mackerel.
Yeah.
So, I mean, we're getting these implications here that never develop. It's like, why don't you just say it?
Yeah.
With me, by that point, it's like, this character is gay, and again, you're just not telling me. And I'm like, Ish. Now, of course, with me, and I think, anybody who knows me here already knows this, I wasn't fully out at that time. So I was like, this isn't comfortable for me to watch this. I imagine any gay person watching this in the 1990s, after Matthew Shepard died, right in the middle of Deep Space Nine, is going to say, you're Star Trek. Why are you stifling this character?
Yeah.
Who could come out any minute, and we would understand it. It would all be leading up to this.
I mean, they could have had him. They could have had him come out, but they didn't have to go like all the way. You know what I'm saying? Where they would have had to put a rated R rating on the episode.
No, I mean they could have
just said it
and had the conversation.
Yeah, they could have just said it.
I mean, I think maybe that was it. I think they were afraid if he came out, there would have to be a sex scene. There did not have to be.
They didn't have to.
The character could just come out, and he could still have boyfriends. It wouldn't have to be sexual.
Yeah.
I mean, you didn't see anybody else on the show having any sexual encounter.
Yeah.
It could have been just the same way with him. He could have just, had romances or something.
There's ways they could have shown affection without even having it go there. I mean, they could have hugged. They could have exchanged gifts. They could have done, they could have done any number of things.
I mean, I don't know why they'd assume that a gay character would be more inclined to do something R-rated on a show than a heterosexual would. Why didn't they just...
I mean, they could have shown that humanity as acceptance of this diversity that actually transcended all that. And
they could have bought homophobia as a part of Cardassian culture, and they could have gone into explaining where humans had evolved beyond that.
That's right.
Prejudice. That would have been. They did that. They did that with. Now, here's one thing about Deep Space Nine that they did overtly mention it. Speaking of Big Fontaine, there was an episode where there was this program error where there were these gangsters taking over his club.
Yeah.
And Sisko didn't want to go in there with his fiancée at the time, Cassidy Yates.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
And he very overtly said, I have a problem with Las Vegas in 1962 when black people weren't allowed to go there except to be servants or waiters. And he said, it wasn't an easy time for my people, and I'm not going to pretend it wasn't. I mean, he says something very overtly pro-black in Star Trek and is very assertive about it, and it's discussed.
Yeah.
And that was pretty bold, even for the 90s, to make that. I mean, now, if you did that in a TV show, they say, oh, you're being an SJW, and all that.
Yeah, that is weird how it's kind of reversed now. You couldn't say that today, but you could then. It's like,
well, you could say it, but somebody would come after you about the SJW thing.
Yeah, it'd start on a whole argument.
Right, but like I said, that was a very overt, and I'm glad he said it. I just wish that Garak had been that overt. That, I mean, even if he and Bashir had, I mean, this may sound old-fashioned. Remember the old episode where you get caught in a wine cellar or something and have to have this dialogue?
Exactly, yeah.
I think All in the Family did an episode like that once.
You were just going to mention that.
Right, where Meathead and Archie got locked in there, and they had to have these really interesting conversations about Archie's past and his abuse and who they were and get to know each other. What if they put Bashir and Garak in some lockable place, and then had Garak in a position where he's like, yes, Bashir, I am madly in love with you. I have been for the past who knows how many years. Let's resolve this and get this out in the open and just deal with this.
Yeah, and just have them understand each other, come to an understanding.
Right, and then that's it. And then they're friends or whatever, and Garak just does whatever he's going to do. I mean, they could still have him be involved with the Dominion Resistance in the end, but it would give more depth to the character.
Yeah.
And that's what I think with these. They have these characters. Some of them they develop very well. Odo developed very well. He started out as this lonely, droopy cynic.
Yeah.
And ended up with a character who was romantic and caring and had a sense of self.
And we understood that there were things said between the lines that he wasn't saying. You know what I'm saying? Like between him and Quark, that at the end, it's like it was written all over his back. Remember how Quark knew that he missed him, but it was like...
Right. In other words, I think in a lot of ways, Quark, being such the opposite of Odo, it kind of sustained Odo's sense of justice.
Yeah.
So he kind of knew he needed Quark to sustain himself.
Like we as the audience could tell, when he was putting up a front,
And even Quark was like, yeah, you need me in your life, Odo. You need that morally questionable person to give you something to challenge you. That's what you need in your life. Quark knew it, and he played into every... Sometimes I think he did things on purpose just to get Odo's reaction.
Yeah.
Like, you feed off this. You need this justice to deal with.
Yeah.
And, so that relationship was interesting, and I'm glad they played on it. Another good thing I liked about when Deep Space Nine started out, with Kira, like you said, I was like, that's enough. You're just here being the snark factory.
She was annoying.
But then after a while, you started to see that Kira again had other complications, massive mother issues, as it turned out.
Yeah.
This very interesting relationship with Odo, where it started out as a mutual respect, then a romance, and then he had to ask her, do you accept me because I look like you or because of who I actually am?
Yeah.
And that was an interesting thing to bring into it. And see, those kind of stories where I don't know why Deep Space Nine didn't take that road more often.
Yeah.
But, you know, there's an episode of Deep Space Nine called, I think it's Chimera, where there's another change that comes on board.
Yeah. Chimera.
I didn't mind that one. That was where, that reminded me of the two sides of Deep Space Nine, that first side of it, where they were trying to develop characters.
Yeah.
Because this is not a changeling from the Dominion. This is one of the 100 that were sent out like Odo. And it deals with, you know, do they just like you because you look like them? Or do they really appreciate you here? I mean, these are important questions. These are very Star Trek-y questions.
Yeah.
And like I said, with all these aliens coming on board and all these people, they forget all this. They could have had aliens come from all parts of the Gamma Quadrant.
Like the visitors, the stories where they had the visitors coming on were kind of more interesting and dealt with those kind of Star Trek questions than the overall
they had one of the first seasons that was interesting. It was early on called Captain Pursuit about that guy who was being...
Yep.
And I mean, they brought this whole storyline about kind of human trafficking into that.
Yeah.
And forced slave labor. And I mean, and in one episode where O'Brien didn't actually suffer much.
Yeah.
He violated the regulations, but Sisko gave him a slap on the wrist and it's like, okay, that's it.
Yeah.
You know, because, you know, he knew that O'Brien acted, you know, from what he thought was ethically correct.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, look at Picard. Did he not say that there can be no justice as long as laws are absolute? That's
right.
And, you know, O'Brien said, you know, I know there's regulations and I can get in trouble, but these people, no.
Yeah.
You know, there's an ethical line I have to draw in the sand here. And it was considered. And those are the stories of Deep Space Nine that I really appreciate, where there's ethical lines being drawn in the sand. And not where they do it sloppily, not like in The Pale Moonlight, where they throw ethics out the window for the sake of action.
Yeah.
You know, or the sake of a dramatic. Well, what was that famous thing in that one? Wasn't that the one where it's a fake?
Oh, yeah, and that, yeah. The Romulan, it's a fake.
I don't know. I mean, I don't know if you've seen it before, but a lot of people have taken that and a scene from a later episode, which I actually really like, called Far Beyond the Stars. And they have the Romulan going, it's a fake. And then they have Sisko in that going, it's real! So, I mean, you know, so that's kind of meme-worthy, yeah. But I'm just saying, I just think of that, when I think of that episode, I think of, it's a fake. You know, just that weird little chestnut in there.
Yeah.
I mean, it's still, I mean, you can't beat out season 3 Shatner for just off the wall, but you know. But no, I guess when I think about Deep Space Nine, it does relate a lot to old Hollywood in some of its ideas, but also it relates to the idea of old Hollywood in its extreme complication and the censorship they seem to have internally.
Yeah.
Star Trek was censoring itself at that point, just like the movie industry in the 30s and 40s was censoring itself.
Yeah.
You know, they didn't, I don't think Deep Space Nine had big restrictions from the network. They were just internally censoring. They would not say that Garrick was gay. They would not overtly, you know, go out of their way to be too, you know, they didn't do too many duet type episodes. You know, they were trying to make it somehow apolitical and more action.
Well, after season 4, I mean, but you know, they were kind of going on a trend up to that point, but they figured the trend wasn't
right.
working.
But again, they started self-censoring. So
and so it's unfortunate that they did what they did, because, like I said, you know, there was, like you said, opportunities missed. You know, that they could have went with these characters that would have been more interesting at the end.
I'm not a big fan of overt story arcs, but if they want to do a 3 or 4 episode or maybe 2 episode thing on Garrick coming out of the closet, I'm all right with that.
Yeah, but what I'm just saying is that for the individual character, like whatever they're dealing with, it gets resolved at the end of the series. You know what I'm saying? Like whatever story threads that they live behind, and we learn about the character along the way, but at the end, you know, they finally come to a resolution with themselves.
I wanted to conclude this, unless you have something to add about the Sisko and the religious thing. Every time that came up, it always seemed completely tacked on.
It never belonged.
It never seemed like something that was organically part of the series. It was like, well, he's a commander. Now I'm the prophet and the emissary. I'm the commander again. Now my mother was a wormhole alien. I got to go to Earth and discover this, and then I'm a captain again. And I got to go back with him.
I think what was going on because of that was the writers probably felt that why is the Starfleet even there? You know, they had, it wasn't like it was enough that the Bajorans wanted to become members of Starfleet, or Federation rather. It's like, why is the Starfleet actually there? And it's like, well, of course they're going to be there because they're trying to facilitate this whole world becoming member of the Federation. But no, that wasn't enough. We have to say, oh, it was predestined. Sisko was going to be there because he's actually a god in a human form. You know, and it's like, come on.
Another unintentional thing.
You know.
I mean, I've even heard people call Cisco Moses. So does that make that plot line Star Trek: The Ten Commandments? I mean, is that what we're dealing with here? Is he supposed to be this Moses character in this Bajoran thing?
Yeah, and why would they even need that story arc there in the first place?
So, like I said, it's an old Hollywood thing, but it's tacked on.
Yeah.
You know, it's not the other stuff. I mean, with the Dominion, it didn't need to be there, but they kind of worked it into the series somehow. You know, it was worked into the fabric somehow. It didn't need to be there, but it was Section 31 found a way to work itself in.
Yeah, it was also 2 ideas that were kind of shoehorned into the series. And
right, they were shoehorned into it, but they worked their way into it somehow. With the Cisco as a religious thing, it always seemed apart. It never. I mean, after Emissary, if I never saw that stuff again, it wouldn't have mattered. And certainly, in the end, you know, his whole mission for these last 7 years is to throw Dukat into a fire pit.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah, they're just pushing Dukat into it. That's it. That was the big thing at the end. I was like,
it's not even that epic. I mean, it's not like Cisco shot laser beams out of his hands and single-handedly destroyed the Jem'Hadar fleet.
Yeah.
You know, it wasn't like he turned into a super being. He just he threw Dukat into a fire pit. And boom,
I think the only thing the fans even gave a crap about was that they got rid of Kai Wynn at the end. But the rest of it, I don't think the fans really cared or even thought that was even relevant. You know,
the Kai Wynn thing, Dukat and her relationship. I mean, first of all, it wasn't pleasant to me.
It was bizarre. The whole thing.
It wasn't pleasant because, you know, I'm thinking of Wynn, a character you're not supposed to like.
Okay.
And
I want to add this in here. Knowing how much Dukat loves the sound of his voice, don't you think you would have picked up on who this guy was the minute he walked through the door and started talking?
Right, because he's sitting there, and, you know, Dukat's one of these guys.
Yeah.
It's almost when he's talking to another character, he's almost like he's looking in a mirror saying, oh, I sound fabulous.
Yeah.
Listen to me. Oh, I just want to kiss that face in the mirror.
Know, just by listening to him talk, how could she not know that this was...
Are you saying that, in other words, we're saying that Wynn is so self-consumed in her own way, she's not seeing... And then she's like, oh, I can't believe I took you to my bed. Oh, I do. You know, I mean, really.
You had to put that in there. Like,
yeah, I mean, I don't be reminded of that moment because you're sitting there letting him call you by your first name in the most hideously unromantic way. And then not only that, we have to see this whole bedroom drama taking place between you. We turn into Wynn and Dukat the soap opera. And it's gross. It's just
days of their lives.
Right, exactly. I mean, it's just no. These are morally bankrupt characters coming together. And then in the end, she's like, well, I know you're Dukat, but I still want to do your evil bidding. My goodness! Wynn, fly out the friggin' window now and just go away. My goodness, your character has lost any semblance of anything remotely resembling moral fortitude. Just go away.
Yes, exactly.
So, I mean, that got me in the end, where she's like, well, you know, I have this book of the paw race, and I know you're Dukat, but I still want to do your evil bidding. It's like, Wynn, you've gone from being a torn character to being an absolute supervillain. It's like you hate Dukat what he represents, yet you want to do evil.
Yeah.
So it's like, what's your point of existing?
At the very end, she decides, oh, it's better to be on the side of good. No, she tells Cisco how to get rid of him. It's like, well, it's too late now.
Yeah, and then how does she die? Oh, you still here? It's like, it's just, her whole life was a ridiculous mess up until that point.
I know it. It's just...
You know, I mean, she starts out being this kind of, you know, deceptive, wishy-washy character, ends up actually doing evil bidding.
Yeah.
And it's just, and then being so self-consumed with it that she doesn't even notice Dukat coming in there and being absolutely in love with every single word that comes out of his mouth, like you said.
Yeah.
If you notice how Mark Alamo played that character, he always spoke as if every word was super important.
Yeah.
Sort of like another Star Trek character from another series you mentioned. Remember Leland the T. Lynch?
Yeah.
Every name counts.
He loves the sound of his own name. He says it with the
full name. Yeah, he and Dukat should have been a team.
Oh,
I am Gul Dukat, and I am Leland T. Lynch. I've gone beyond the Maquis. Leland T. Lynch isn't associated with anybody.
Yeah.
You know, he really... in Star Trek, when it's self-important, because all these characters are always so ethical and everything, so when these self-important, full of themselves characters show up, they really stick out.
Yeah.
You know, and they're usually foils.
Yeah.
The Ducats are supposed to be the villain, but like you said, Kira, I said this to you, I forget the episode, she was on a runabout with him, and he was going through one of his little things like, oh, I wanted to do this, and blah, 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 blah. And she said, you know, Ducat, Sisko's right, you really are in love with the sound of your own voice, aren't you? I mean, he is, honest to goodness, he is the biggest blowhard. And I mean, I got to give credit to Mark Alamo for creating this character who was so consumed with self-denial and narcissism.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, he really acted that role to pieces too. But I mean, honestly,
you want to talk about characters that kind of flipped. I mean, he was one because before the season 4 came around, it seemed to me like Ducat was sort of, you know, becoming a more likable character. Remember how he was kind of interacting better with Sisko a little bit? You know, remember when he was trying to...
they were kind of making Ducat into... Now, we knew he had done real evil in the occupation. We knew that.
Yeah.
But he was sort of becoming this character who was sort of becoming, I don't know, I wouldn't say better, but sort of a little more handleable.
Yeah. And then in season 4, they made him into a turncoat. Yeah, right.
Before they turned him into the supreme narcissist.
Yeah.
You know,
it's like, well, where did that come from? All of a sudden, you know, now he's like, he had that. Remember, he just had that bird of prey that he had captured and everything, and then he decides, oh, I negotiated why would he negotiate anything? He was a nobody at the time.
Exactly. And when we started season 4, the Obsidian Order had gone, and he wasn't crap. So, but you know, all of a sudden he's making all these assumptions of authority and delusions of grandeur and all that kind of business.
Yeah, I mean, it was crazy.
And I mean, to be honest with you, I will say that Wynn, for the most part, didn't really change much. They just made her useless because in the beginning, she was a deceptive, snide character.
Yeah.
And then in the end of the story, she was deceptive, snide, and utterly clueless.
Yeah.
I mean, like you said, how could she have been angry at herself for not noticing Ducat right in front of her in disguise?
Yeah. His voice alone would have gave him away.
And right, he's telling him all this stuff, and she's like, well, you know, how could you be that person? That situation didn't happen that way. It's like, shouldn't that have been the end of it?
Yeah.
You know, like a Scooby-Doo moment. You're not really whatever.
I mean, remember her assistant even picked up there was something wrong with the guy, right?
And then Ducat killed him.
Yeah. So
and it's almost like this whole thing is set up to be seduced into this Pare thing, which even when she knows it's Gul Dukat, and she hates that, and she hates that she went to the bed with him, which she mentions. Like, you're reminded of that unpleasantness.
Yeah.
Because I mean, and like I said, that was the closest to a PG-rated one we had in that show, him and her being intimate.
Yeah.
Something I really didn't want to see, to be honest. Just because the two characters are, no.
Yeah.
You know, it's like, this is like the soap opera where the villains actually have this romantic interlude.
Yeah. And
then it's like, I can't believe we took you to my bed. It's like, well, nobody can.
Yeah.
I didn't watch this show to see you two sleep with each other.
Yeah.
That's not what the show is supposed to be about. And you just threw this thing in the end of it. And now, well, you know, but I don't care. I know who you are, but I'm still going to...
It just seemed like a very poor way of trying to bring some kind of closure to this Pa-Wraith emissary kind of story by, you know, I mean, it was like, you know, this really didn't feel right, you know. And
also the Pa-Wraith story was kind of thrown in, again, with Keiko.
Yeah.
Of course, what better character to bring in a new plot point than Keiko? Because, I mean, like you said, if she was possessed on the show by another character and she was distant from O'Brien, who would notice?
Yeah, didn't that episode where they had the two, you know, like they had Jake and Kira kind of having this fight, and wouldn't that have been more of a fitting ending to this emissary thing if they'd have had the similar kind of setup where they had the Pyrene spirit and the, you know, the wormhole alien spirit kind of thing having this big final battle on Bajor, and that would have been the reason.
Yeah, they just kind of like kept it going and going and going, and they didn't really resolve it. The Reckoning should have been the end of that.
Yeah.
Like, okay, we've had this battle, the emissary's over, you can go back to being a Starfleet commander, and this, whatever.
Yeah, that should have been the ending to the series, would have been that big showdown between the two, you know.
Right. Could we agree, I'd be basically in the end, that if they had just taken out some unnecessary things, the Dominion War, the whole thing with Section 31, whatever that was between Dukat and Wynn at the end of the show.
Yeah.
And not done any of that, but the series might have been an interesting adjunct to Star Trek. They had a lot of people-oriented stories to tell and a lot of stories about cooperation if they had just done it a certain way.
They needed to trust the fans more. You know, that the stories could have got better over time if they'd have just worked it out.
A lot, don't we?
Yeah, they should have just worked it out.
You and I keep having that conversation about how they think Star Trek fans are.
Fans went through 2 seasons.
Just make stupid signs all the time, and we're
look how long it took for the fans to warm up to the Next Generation, but at the end, they loved it. It could have been the same thing with Deep Space Nine if they'd have just stuck to their guns and worked the stories out.
Like I said, I really liked where it was going in the beginning.
Yes.
I mean, now the series started out slow, but I said, if they just picked up on this, they could really go. And then it's like, oh, don't go that way. Come on, go.
Yeah.
Just pull back a little bit. Put it in. And be honest, I mean, not that I have a problem with Worf, but Worf was a Next Generation character. They already had one with O'Brien.
Yeah.
Worf didn't per se need to be there.
I mean, it was nice seeing him on there. I mean, it was.
Yeah, there was waiting for that. It wasn't. It was nothing more, nothing less. Worf was not needed. No.
Yeah, he wasn't needed.
He was a character from another show, and they should have just kept him in the TNG movies and been enough.
He was in them anyway, so why? There was means to work him in.
And like I said, he just was another team player in Deep Space Nine. Excuse me. He had his own. He was just another character. He wasn't really integral to. I mean, they could have done all the stuff without Worf being there.
Yeah.
So, I don't know. I mean, to me, Deep Space Nine is missed opportunities and some good ideas that were there. And I think that basically, again, the whole idea of it being inspired or dealing with old Hollywood tropes may have confined it in the same way old Hollywood got confined.
Yeah, I bet you're right. Yeah, about that.
So, is there anything you wanted to add to this? Because I think I've covered everything.
Well, all I want to say is that I know we kind of really dumped on Deep Space Nine tonight, but
you think it was really too much dumping? Oh, okay.
I don't. I mean, I know maybe the more we talked about it, it's like the more things we found wrong with it. But it's like
they could have done this. You mean that's?
But there were some good episodes in the series as a whole. I mean, there were some.
Absolutely. I hope I mentioned some of them. I mentioned Duet. There was Chimera was another one I liked. Now these are not obvious fan favorites.
Yeah.
I mean, Duet people like it.
There were some tearjerker moments, with the characters, especially between Odo and Kira and stuff like that. And
there was one that it was kind of a standalone where Vedic Bareil, who I didn't mention because again he was a character they never really expanded on. I call that a tearjerker because speaking of PJ, we actually got to see him and Kira intimate too.
Yeah.
In the shadows, we knew they had an intimate relationship, and even though they disagreed on spiritual matters occasionally, they were developing. I would have loved to have seen that develop a little bit more.
Yeah.
They killed him off kind of quick.
They did, and the character was kind of getting interesting, and then they decided.
And I gotta be honest, when they brought Shakar in, he and Kira just never had the chemistry any more than O'Brien and Keiko did.
No, I mean he was interesting as a character individually, but
right. Shakar was interesting, but with Kira, it didn't seem like they quite gelled, and they just kind of trailed off. They didn't really break up; they just kind of trailed off.
Yeah.
They went to some Bajoran temple and they found they weren't meant to walk the stars together, I guess.
Yeah.
I mean, of course, that was also the same actor who played that anaphasic ghost that seduced Crusher. So.
Yeah.
But of course, he's playing Shakar. But and of course, I mean, it was funny but annoying when Kira had to have. Keiko's baby, but Shakar and O'Brien were being miserable. It was just, It was the funny part of it was not them being miserable, but that Keiko was kind of oblivious to it.
Yeah.
Why he was being miserable. Because of this infatuation we talked about with Kira and O'Brien. And Keiko's like, oh, you two are behaving like children. Did you notice why? I mean, Shakar even picks up on this infatuation.
Yeah.
And if Shakar can do it and he just basically met O'Brien, what's Keiko's excuse?
Yeah, really.
So, I mean, that the comedy in that comes out of Keiko being useless again.
Yeah.
But like I said, so it just, there's some tearjerkers. There's some good social stories. We're told Far Beyond the Stars, which was, now that again brought this Pa-Ray thing into it somehow, or this orb thing, but talked about the civil rights era and struggles that were dealt with that. And that was interesting. To go that route with it. I wish they'd done it another way. That was an interesting episode too. So it had its moments.
Yeah.
And you're right. It does seem like there was a lot of problematic things with it. But I almost feel like Deep Space Nine, if they rebooted any Star Trek, I would love to see that rebooted another way.
Yeah, because like you said, there was a lot of missed opportunities there that probably would have shaped the show up to be a bit more interesting than it ended up ultimately being. It was just.
But for the record out there, I am sick to death of reboots. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Just saying that. I'm just saying if they wanted to, I wouldn't mind seeing it just for a little thing.
Yeah.
I mean, just to have like a replay of that.
Yeah.
Just I mean, a fan could write a fiction, I suppose, but really, I think that again, it's like you have things you really want to see, you really like, but they're not presented in front of you.
Yeah.
And now that I think about it, Deep Space Nine, in a lot of ways, the way it was conducted between the two sides of Deep Space Nine, could basically go for what's happened to Star Trek since. Missed opportunities, not taken in favor of others that don't work as well.
Yeah.
I mean, you could say that for Enterprise, a certain degree, Voyager.
Yeah.
So, would it be fair and even keel, as much as those words are getting less and less usable these days, to say that Deep Space Nine was at best opportunities unspoken or untaken, and at worst controversial?
Yeah, controversial. It missed opportunities, but still, it's a good addition to the Star Trek canon as it is. I mean, even though there's things we have problems with, but there were still good stories in it. That you really can't just discard out of hand, because they really do build up that prime timeline that we still like even to this day. So you can't just throw it all away. It still has to be there. So,
yeah, that's like I said. I don't want to see it deliberately rebooted, but it would be interesting to see it taken out by a fan or something another way.
Yeah, and I wouldn't trust anybody rebooting it today that's out there in Hollywood now, because they totally screw it up.
Right. I don't want to see that kind of reboot done, but I would love to see just like maybe we could do it in a context like there's this old joke about Jake as a writer that Jake Sisko's really the guy that wrote Deep Space Nine.
Yeah, or just say like something happened in the timeline and everything got altered in somewhere, and Deep Space Nine is now different now than it was originally. It's like the timeline got altered.
I always had this idea for the finale of Deep Space Nine. It would have been cool if Jake had been on Deep Space Nine writing the last chapter of that book. What was it called? Anselm.
Anselm, yeah.
Which is so obviously Deep Space Nine,
Yeah.
And the idea that he would be writing that last chapter out, and Sisko would still be there.
And then he goes, and then he knew he had to save his father, so he goes back and saves him, and that changed everything that we knew about Deep Space.
Or like it's always a fantasy that he was just writing it out, and then in the end, his father's still there.
Yeah.
Like, so Jaco, you finished the novel or something, and then Barial's still alive, and this is all just a book.
Yeah.
Right? Did I just basically turn this into the end of Roseanne?
Or like the end of Enterprise, kind of like they had Riker.
Well, I don't know what that was, but the holodeck scenario. But like if Jake had been like, you wrote the last 4 seasons.
Yeah.
Or, maybe, you have Wayne or something walk in and say, oh, we're ready to sign the Dominion Federation Peace Treaty now.
Yeah. So
I gotta finish this war in my book. Hold on.
Yeah, we jump ahead and
then have Wayne's like, add that. It would have been interesting to see it like the whole opposite happen, that the Dominion encountered the Federation, they iron something out.
Yeah.
And Sisko's and Jake's just writing out this book that spices all this events up.
Yeah.
And he wrote all that stuff. Although it would have been a little bit of a cop-out, I suppose. But I just have this little fantasy.
Yeah, but that would have been a complete Star Trek kind of thing, because that's happened in just individual episodes and different spin-offs of Star Trek. It's just, But yeah, I mean,
I know. It's so close to the end way Roseanne ended, I know. But
I know.
I mean, how they ended that show that she was writing a book.
But I think it kind of would have redeemed a little bit of Deep Space Nine, I think, with that kind of...
some of it did happen, but Jake embellished some of it.
Yeah.
To make it more exciting.
Yeah.
And, the reality was very different. I would have loved to have seen that, because that would have opened up a whole new Star Trek universe right there.
Yeah. The retelling of Deep Space Nine from a certain point, how it really went,
And they could have done the last episode or so about the reality of it.
Yeah.
Because like I said, we talked about that earlier. Some of the later part of Deep Space Nine does seem like it was written by a teenager. So, it kind of makes sense to have this teenage Jake writing this very fanciful, magisterial take on what was happening on the space station to kind of make it.
He's kind of like borrowing from old Hollywood and borrowing from
just this trope that he knew from history.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, that would have been a cool idea. Actually, it's still kind of a cool idea. No?
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know. It just could work, you know? I mean, but yeah, so I mean, and even still fans today say that, yeah, Jake actually wrote this series. You know, it's all a book.
You know, let's actually make an actual the end. This wasn't the end. The one we saw wasn't the end. There's another the end coming, and this is the story.
Well, you know, again, in Far Beyond the Stars, I kind of wondered if that's kind of where they were going with that. That the wormhole aliens or the prophets or whatever we wanted to call them, if they were actually writing Deep Space Nine out somehow.
Yeah.
Because they had that character who was Cisco, who was writing Deep Space Nine basically on the wall.
On this wall, yeah.
Like, so and even in that episode, he's like, so is Benny Russell writing our lives? You know, so it's almost
there'd have been
like
a question left.
I was like, is this series basically just some guy in the 50s writing this?
Yeah. It would have left the ending with a question mark.
So there was always this impression that Deep Space Nine within the Star Trek universe was internal fiction. They always kind of played with that.
Yeah.
So it would have been cool to have Jake like writing half of it.
Yeah.
Like there was a Cisco, there was a Deep Space Nine, there was a Kira, there were all these people. But after season 4, Jake just went wild and started creating all these little side things.
Yeah.
You know, and then the whole thing was different.
Yeah, making his great novel.
Right. And the reality of it was just all very Star Trek. Like, well, the Bajorans enjoy the Federation and the Dominion, everybody's all cool. Yeah.
That would have been perfect because, see, Voyager got spun off before season 4, so that would have been okay as far as canon.
Exactly, because Voyager still could have been there.
Yeah. So you know, the more we talk, the closer we get to some justice here to what to do with these things.
So I mean, there's a positive thing right there. Something that never happened. Jake wrote it.
Yeah.
Jake just embellished it in the novel, and that's why it ended up looking so big.
That's why everything got weird.
Right, because it's a teenager writing a novel to make everything pumped up.
Yeah.
You know. But like I said, I always had this fantasy that, you know, what you leave behind. Kira and Jake look out the window, and then you see Jake up there writing that part in the book.
Yeah.
And Cisco's right there. And he's not with the wormhole aliens.
Yep.
And looks at it like, Jake, why have you got me with those people? I haven't counted them for 7 years. You know, that just would have been a funny ending. It's like, well, I thought it would be good drama. You know, I mean, it would have been interesting if the whole last 4 seasons had been a totally different thing.
Yeah.
And then they spent the last hour telling you what really happened.
Yeah.
You know,
they just kind of, you know, fed it to you sort of a little bit like a narrator.
Of course, that might have run into, what was it, Dynasty, where they had, I think it was Dynasty, was it Dallas, where they had Patrick Duffy in the shower.
Yeah, that was halfway through the show when they wanted to bring his character back.
Right, they killed him off, and then all of a sudden the last season was a dream.
Yeah, the whole season before that was just...
I mean, I just didn't want to seem like that, but I thought, since it started, that would be kind of interesting.
Yeah, that was like the one science fiction moment in Dallas, was that? It was like...
Right, that was just weird in Dallas.
Yeah.
Dallas was not sci-fi, but all of a sudden in the end, it's like, oh... Or they had, I think at the end of Newhart, they had him wake up with his wife from the first show.
Oh, exactly, yeah.
And Saying Elsewhere never happened. None of it happened. It was a boy with autism all in his mind. It was in a little snow dome.
Yep.
So Saying Elsewhere is not even a thing. So I mean, I still would have liked the first seasons of Deep Space Nine to have happened, and then have the whole Klingon thing just be Jake's imagination.
Yeah.
Who knows? Maybe Cisco would still have hair. I don't know.
Yeah, you didn't shave his hair off.
Maybe the whole thing was totally different.
Yeah.
You know, maybe they were still, I don't know. I mean, it would have been interesting to see it done.
He just wanted to do like what John Boy did, or Earl Hamner. He made a story about his family, but he changed his name to John.
Of course, you've still got First Contact and Insurrection to deal with.
Yeah, but those could have been, you know, stories that, you know, off of the, you know what I'm saying? They were just, Worf was there and stuff, but, you know, it wasn't like from his imagination. It would have just been actual things that were going on in the real world where Jake's, you know what I'm saying?
Hey, don't knock it, though. You know, the way they're playing around loose with canon now, somebody could say, hey, I remember all that stuff that happened after Deep Space Nine? Yeah, that never happened. Jake really did write that.
Yeah.
Who knows?
You want to reboot the Prime timeline? We'll start there, you know, maybe.
Within the Prime timeline.
Yeah,
But then we have to say, because
Voyager would still be legit, you know.
Voyager would still be legit.
Would still be legit. Enterprise will be what it is. I mean, you know,
that's a bit messy, but still. Yeah. Nemesis, I don't know if that could be there.
Yeah, Nemesis could, because everything that happened like on the big screen could still be there. It's like stuff that happened while Jake was writing his story about his fictitious Deep Space Nine characters or something, you know, whatever.
We haven't seen the Dominion since.
Yeah.
So I mean,
they didn't even fight really the Dominion at all.
Like I had this idea that, you know, maybe Wayon and the female changeling would come into the room like, oh yeah, we're just finishing our negotiations with the Federation to sign the treaty.
Yeah.
And then there's this kind of comical idea that all of a sudden Wayon and Cisco are all looking at Jake's book and trying to edit it. It's kind of this comical scene, like, oh, let me do that, have me do this, have me do that, you know?
Yeah.
Just like have it just kind of be a fun thing in the end.
Yeah,
like,
there's all kinds of ways you can work around it, so that
way. Doesn't have Patrick Duffy in the shower.
Yeah.
You know,
you don't have to alter the whole thing, but there's a way you can alter it and keep everything legit that's outside of that realm of Deep Space Nine.
So, I mean, and that would have been kind of, because they already kind of implied Deep Space Nine could be internal fiction, so
yeah.
Why not?
Yeah.
So anyway, we've discussed Deep Space, and we discussed a lot of the issues we had with it, but more the Deep Space Nine was a show about possibilities. Possibility of, you know, people coming together in a tense situation, and the possibilities of what the show itself could have been.
Yeah.
More so than what it was. But hey, in the society of Star Trek reboots and let's change everything around, gotta be worth a couple of pages in somebody's book, right?
Oh yeah, with the right people behind it, they could really pull it off good, you know.
So there's that germ of an idea. So anyway, anything more you have to add?
Nope.
So anyway, next week will be episode 23. I think I have an idea what it might be, but Jeff may change his mind. But anyway, next week, you know, live long and prosper, and
see you next week.
Next week.
Yep.